There are certain players that the more you watch them, the more you really like them, the more you get it, the more you understand why you're seeing others be high on their talents and their ability to project well to the NFL level. Sometimes it's the opposite. You don't see it and you think people are freaking nuts. But you have those times where you sit there and the more you watch a guy, the more you really start to like their game. And for that first bucket, Tyjae Spears from Tulane certainly falls into that bucket. And I remember going years back and watching another running back from Tulane. His name was Matt Forte. And saying to myself, this guy has size. I'm not comparing Spears to Forte, by the way, just to be clear. I'm making a point. I saw Forte and I saw his size, I saw his athleticism, and even though his last year in college, they ran a lot more and they kind of changed the system that they had, this was a guy that had 3 down abilities, and the rare times I would get to see a Tulane game with Matt Forte, it was some impressive stuff that I would see. And when the Bears took him in the second round in 2008, I said, holy shit, I wish he would have been the pick in the middle of round 1 because I certainly feel better about him than I do Chris Williams. I look at Tyjae Spears, and the more I watched him, the more you get it. And you said, man, if he played at a bigger name program, he probably gets a lot more buzz as a guy that should be going in round 1, in my opinion. So let's talk about Spears and what he brings to the table. In terms of his strengths, the things I really like most that stand out about his game, he's got good initial burst to hit the hole quickly. He's not explosive in terms of his quickness, but he does have good initial burst to be able to hit the hole quickly, in part, I think, because when he sees the hole, he's decisive. He's got nice change of direction and pace in the open field, and he's enough of a threat in terms of his long speed to be a threat to break off some big runs. Like, he's a guy that the more you watched him, the more big play ability you saw out of him and the more big plays you saw him connect on in 2022. Really liked his cutting ability. His cuts are sudden, they're effective. Talking about his jump cuts, but also, planning on the outside leg and then getting skinny and heading in the straight direction. His cuts like that don't require, the best way I can put it is, they don't require a ton of gather. Like, he can plant and go, compared to some other backs in this class where they plant and then they've got to kind of like gather themselves in that go. He can just basically plant and go. Also really like his patience. He's a patient runner, allows his blocking to develop in front of him. He also helps frame his blocking and his run lanes in terms of where he goes right after he gets the ball. He has the vision to see where the hole has developed or is going to develop, and the recognition skills to attack it. Like, it's one thing to see it. It's another thing to see it and be able to quickly react and quickly respond and quickly hit that hole. And Spears has that skill in great abundance. And for a guy that is as skilled as he is and as good as he was in 2022, the reality is he's still got relatively low mileage on him, less than 500 career touches at Tulane. So where some of these guys are really, really good in the draft and you worry about them because they got 800, 900, 1,000 touches at college, whatever the case might be, he's got less than 500. Like, that's not too bad, You feel like he's still pretty fresh heading into the NFL level. So what are some of the drawbacks on him? What are some of the things that stood out in terms of why he's not in that top tier of running backs? Obviously, he lacks the ideal size of a feature back. You'd want a back to be a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger, a little more bulk on his frame. Maybe get to the NFL, make a baby or two, and then put on 10 to 20 pounds of natural grown man weight. Sometimes that does the trick for these guys. As a receiver, he's very basic in terms of his route tree. So, it's similar to talk to Charbonnet. Like, there's a way you can deploy him in the passing game, but it's kind of limited. Same thing with Spears. Also, his hands are hit and miss catching the ball. He'll make some spectacular catches, and then he will drop some really easy ones. And if he wants to be a starter in the NFL level, he wants to be a 3-down back, he's got to be more consistent with his hands in terms of catching the football. He also had a couple of fumbles late in the year. Talk about the UCF game, USC, due to being a bit loose with the ball. Now, that popped up at the tail end of the year. It wasn't like he had major ball security issues throughout the season. However, You're getting to the end of the year. Those are two big spots. Those are two pretty big games. You're talking about conference championship, bowl game. You want to not put the ball on the ground there. He can also, we talked about his patience and how that's really good. And yeah, I always take a patient running back. However, sometimes he can be a little too deliberate in attacking the hole. He can wait a little too long. I talked about he'll see it and he'll attack it, and that's true. He certainly flashes that ability and has shown that ability, but there are those times that he can be a little too deliberate in doing so. And this is going to sound like a nitpick, this next thing, but when he gets to the outside, he doesn't switch the ball to his outside arm and hand when running to the sideline. Specifically, he almost always, when he's running to the left, he will keep the ball in his right hand. And that is something you worry about in the NFL. Somebody's going to come from inside him from behind and then peanut punch that ball the hell out of there. Another concern with him is that he does have a history of knee problems. So some things teams will certainly have to think through, certainly will have to look at and determine whether or not they feel good about him or not. But assuming he's healthy, and these are assumptions, but sometimes you got to project a little bit, right? And you got to make some assumptions here with some of these guys. Assuming that his knees check out, assuming that he works on his hands and he's a little bit better, he's absolutely the type of guy that could be a 3-down back at the NFL level. Right? His ability to cut, his ability to make people miss. And you talk about a guy here that he's harder to tackle than you would think for a guy than less than ideal size. This is a guy that you look at as a late day 2, early day 3 type of pick that feels like in 2 years ends up looking like a pretty smart pick, looking like a pretty good value. He doesn't have certainly the speed of Gibbs, Robinson in this class, but there's more than one way to be a successful NFL running back. And you talk about his ability to change direction, change speeds in the open field. He does have some speed. Like, he will surprise you. You get the ball in his hands and you get him in space. He can make big runs happen. He will run through some tackles. He will make guys miss. He's got low mileage on him. Like, there's a lot to Spears' game that I do like. I've got him as a 3rd-round talent. I vacillated a little bit between 2nd round, 2nd to 3rd round, 3rd round. I think when I look at some of the drawbacks here, some of the things like the size piece to me is like, that's a whatever. That's not a deal breaker for me. The hands being hit or miss, you could say he's got to get better there. I agree, but I think he will. The fumbles thing, like, again, some of these are nitpicks. They're not switching the ball from one arm to the other. Being too deliberate to attack the hole, that goes hand in hand sometimes with being really, really patient, which is a really, really good thing. If physically his medicals check out, like, yeah, this is a guy I'd feel confident spending like a 3rd-round pick on. I compared him to somebody like Michael Carter, drafted in a similar range, although Michael Carter, I think, went a little bit later, didn't he? But yeah, Spears is a guy that I think in the right team with the right fit, given the opportunity, at worst case, he is a high-performing running back too. But I certainly think he has at least average NFL starter ability in him.